All right, how many kids liked it? Now, how about, let's see, how many kids, first of all, how many kids usually read sports books? Some kids read sports books, okay. Now, for the kids who don't usually read sports books, did you still like Winners Take All? Oh, okay, good. Well, that's good, because sometimes I find that kids who, they wouldn't necessarily read the book, but then when they get into it, they say, oh, this is an interesting book. The other thing, let me tell you who liked the character Hans, the grandmother? Well, I'll tell you where I got that character, and that was years ago when I was writing the book. I was in an online chat, a national online chat for children's authors. And we had to practice, like, sort of getting questions and answering questions online. And so I was practicing with the woman who was running this, and I was kind of talking back and forth with her mother, who was an older woman who lived in Cincinnati and who was a huge Cincinnati Reds baseball fan. And so, after I did this chat, I thought, boy, she'd be a really good character. And you know what her name was? What? Hansi. And so they called her Hansi. And what was really nice is when you write a book, your publisher gives you a certain number of books to give to your friends and just sort of hand out. They'll give you like 20 free books. And one of the books I sent of Winners Take All, of course, I sent to Hansi. And the woman wrote me and she said, oh, she was so happy with the book that she even cried. So it was kind of nice. That was a fun part of that book.
Jack,
all right.
Jack, do you want to tell Mr. Bowen what you told me about Winners Take All after you finished reading it? Wasn't it you who told me? Don't remember? I think it was Jack who told me, stand up, Jack, so he can see who you are. I think it was Jack who told me that Winners Take All was the best book he had ever read. Wasn't it you, Jack? Yeah, I thought so.
Well, good. There are lots of kids who like that book. I mean, and I'll actually tell you another little story about the book. That was, I wrote the book, let's see, it's something like 13 years ago. But there was a very famous children's author, his name is Avi, A-V-I, and he saw me speak, and he said, gee, I would like you to write a sports book for me, and what he was doing at the time was a project called Breakfast Cereals, and what they did was they serialized a book for the newspaper. In other words, they would put one chapter in 1 week, and then the second chapter would come in the next week, being in the newspaper, and it was trying to get kids to get in the habit of reading the newspaper. Now, and that's why, when I wrote the book, one of the nice things about the book is all the chapters have sort of cliffhanger endings. And that was because when trying to write the book for the newspaper, you had to give some reason for the kids to, oh, I can't wait for the next chapter. Well, it was funny. I wrote 4 chapters, and I outlined the rest of the book. Avi called me up and said, well, I like the book, and you write very well, but he says it's too much sports. He says too many games. And I said, well, that's a sports book. And he said, well, maybe I don't want a sports book. And so it never got to get in the newspaper, but it's probably one of my most popular books. And I think part of it is because of the cliffhanger endings. That it was all the endings have, oh, you can't wait to get to the next chapter.
It's interesting that you say that, Mr. Bowen, because we talked a lot about how each of your chapters had cliffhanger endings, and it was one of the things that the kids wanted me to ask you about is how do you do that? How do you know how just the point to end every single chapter so that when I would tell the kids, only read to chapter 5 today, and they would come in and they would say, we can't, we have to keep going.
Right. And actually, one of my favorites is I think it's the end of chapter 3, when Kyle gets on the phone. And yes, at the end of chapter 3, it's that the voice on the other end got straight to the point. I know you didn't make that catch. Well, I've never seen anybody who stopped there. They always like, whoa, what's going on? And so that's the way you do cliffhanger endings, and I don't do them in every one of my books, although I try to have endings at the chapters that'll make the reader want to go on. Is that really comes from that first part of planning the book, and that is what is going to happen in each of the chapters. And so you really have to have a plan. You can't just sit down, or at least I have to have a plan. You can't just sit down and start to write. You really have to have a plan for it.
Okay. Do you have any other questions for the kids, Mr. Bowen?
I don't think so.
Kids?
I don't think so. I hope everybody will. The one thing I will say is, if you want to become a good writer in anything that you do, you really have to. I always tell kids you got to do 2 things, and one I've mentioned, you have to read more. In other words, when you read, you hear good writing in your head, and it makes it easier to do the writing. And the second thing I've mentioned too, not so much TV and video games, because it really doesn't help you with your writing. The reading really helps you with the writing. Is that all right? I think, but I don't have any more questions. Does anybody else have questions?
Any more questions? Lily? Why don't you go up to the front so you can see who's asking, okay? While she's coming up, Mr. Bowen, just before you made that last comment, our principal walked in. I don't know if you can see him in the back of the room, but he's
him in the back.
He's our big fan of no TV, no video games. Read, get out and play, spend time with your family. So when you said that, he put up a big cheer. Go ahead, Lily.
Don't watch TV. That's what I say.
Go ahead.
When you watch sports games, if you do normally, do you use some of the scores and what happens in the games for some of your books?
Well, actually, it's interesting. I've been sometimes I've used games that I saw or incidents that I saw in games for the book. And actually, I'll tell you, in Winners Take All, the thing that actually inspired me to do the book, I forgot to tell you this, and that was I was watching a game on television years and years ago, and it was my Boston Red Sox were playing in Fenway Park. And by the way, who's ever been to Fenway Park? Anybody ever been to Fenway Park? Well, Fenway Park is a very famous baseball stadium with a huge left field wall that's 37 feet high called the Green Monster. But the right field wall is maybe about 5 feet high. And in the game that I was watching, the Red Sox right fielder was a guy named Dwight Evans, and just like Kyle in the book, he went running back, caught the ball, hit the fence, flipped over, and the ball fell out. But unlike Kyle, Dwight Evans smacked his glove and kicked the dirt and made it clear that he had caught the ball. But the announcer on television said, if Dwight Evans was thinking right now, he'd hold up the ball. And I thought, wait a second, that's cheating. The announcer didn't think so. And so, I don't know if you noticed, but a couple of years ago, in a baseball game, something very similar happened in a game as happened in Winners Take All, and that was a Yankees outfielder was going for a foul ball. He went into the crowd, the ball dribbled away, and the Yankee outfielder showed his closed glove to the umpire as if like, oh, I have the ball here. But he didn't have the ball there. And the umpire said, okay, he's out. And he just walked away and never had the ball. And a lot of the players sort of said, oh, that's okay. It's all right to try to fool the umpire. But I kind of thought, wait a second, that's a pretty bad example. And so, that's where I got the idea for a book for Winners Take All, and I've always thought it was an interesting idea. And it seems like kids think so, too. Okay? Oh, you're welcome.
I have one more question for you, Mr.
Sure.
Bowen. Would you tell the kids that a perfect season in a sport is when you win every game?
Well, actually, the funny thing is, I wrote a column once, and as a coach, I said that a perfect season for me was one game, like in a basketball game. One game you win by like 20 points. Everything you do goes right. In other words, that all the things that I would be telling my players, such as, drive to the basket, move around, pass the ball, take a good shot, all those things, they do it, and it all comes true. And wow, we played great. That's the way we're supposed to play. That's one game. I would like another game where the other team beats us by 20 points. And everybody goes, why would you want that? Well, it shows the kids, we're going to have to get better. We're not so good, but we can just sort of take it easy. So have one game where you win by 20, one game that you lose by 20, and let's say the rest of the games are just close and you win some and you lose some. For me, as a coach, that was a perfect season. That's a repeat because the kids learn the most from that.
So it's not all about winning.
Oh, everybody thinks it is, but it's, one of the things that I remind parents all the time. I say, listen, most kids who play recreational sports don't play in high school. Only about 1 or 2% of the high school players go on to play in college, and almost no one plays in the pros. So the kids have to learn something other than just how to be ball players. They should be learning how to be good teammates, how to accept defeat, how to work hard, all those things. Those are what kids should be getting out of sports as opposed to winning. And frankly, most of the time, you don't learn that much from winning. Everybody loves winning. It's real hard to lose and then say, okay, I got to start again. I got to get better. I got to work harder at it. I got to try hard. We got one more question, then I better get back to that soccer book that I'm writing.
Okay, Leah, go ahead. You can stand up right where you are, okay?
One time when I was playing soccer, we won a game, and then the next game, my coach was like, even though we won, we can't be lazy. We gotta keep the pace.
Oh, yeah. Well, one of the things you remind kids, and sometimes it's hard for the kids to understand, is that every game's a new game. My son, like I said, is a baseball coach. And are you sure you know? No, cancel. Something came up on my computer. My son's a baseball coach. And every game, baseball is very unpredictable. In other words, you think like, the best team's going to win. Well, in the major leagues, the best team loses 40% of their games. And the worst team wins 40% of their games. That means they win 2 out of 5. So lots of times it's you can't predict, and you can't think like, we won last time, so we're going to win easy. A lot of games are close, and in soccer, an unbelievable number of games are decided by one goal. So one play makes all the difference.
We actually
Okay.
won the game, like our second game. So we're like, okay, we gotta win the next game, but you just gotta work hard,
Well, lots of times, if you work hard and you try your best, that's all you can do. The other thing, too, is one of the hardest lessons of sports to learn is, I tried my hardest, I gave everything I had, and it still didn't turn out the way I wanted it to. But that happens lots of times. In other words, sometimes people work very, very hard at something, and it doesn't turn out the way that they thought it would or wanted it to. That's just something you have to accept. That's a tough lesson. But sports teaches that lesson.